Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So, I just watched Queenie. Let's talk about it. So Queenie was created by Carty-Williams, who also wrote the acclaimed novel that this series is based off of. Now, both the book and the series are centered on the titular character called Queenie, who is this 20-something Black British Jamaican young woman who is living in London and works as a social media assistant at a journalism company, newspaper company, publisher, something along those lines. Now, this series is a typical kind of coming of age story about a 20-something-year-old woman who's just trying to figure things out. But the difference with this one is that it is, of course, centered on a Black British woman who comes from an immigrant family from the Windrush generation, and it explores her story, her identity, and the struggles that she's facing in this particular moment in her life and career. So when we're introduced to the character, she's going through a rough patch in her relationship. She's in a relationship with this white boy who she has absolutely no chemistry with. We'll talk about that in a second, okay? But his name is Tom, I believe, or something generic along those lines. And she is struggling with Tom because, she finds herself unable to open up to him. She's not able to share, her thoughts and her troubles with him, and she has a lot of childhood trauma that she hasn't really taken the time to work through. Meanwhile, Tom is getting increasingly less patient with her, and not to mention there are cultural struggles within their relationship because his family members have been incredibly racist and discriminatory and insensitive towards her, right to her face. Grandma, what the hell? Right to her face. And Tom has done absolutely nothing, zilch, in order to defend his girlfriend. So through that storyline, the series also dabbles in the struggles of interracial dating. Now, all of these difficulties couldn't have come at a worse time for Queenie, because right at the beginning of the series, she finds out that she actually suffered a miscarriage, and she didn't even realize that she was pregnant to begin with, but kind of finding out this information all at once, that she was pregnant and that she lost a child, has taken a huge toll on her. And so we see her kind of work through that throughout the series as well. And that, combined with her breakup with Tom, leads her down this troublesome, turbulent path of meaningless sex and, these horrible relationships with men that feel really unfulfilling and don't feel the hole in Queenie's heart that may never be filled, considering she refuses to address some childhood trauma that has followed her into her early 20s. Now, all of the troubles that Queenie is facing in her personal life starts to bleed into her professional career as well, as she starts showing up for work late and she's, drunk or hungover. She's not putting in the work and not able to fulfill the tasks that are set by her manager. And so it's all going to shit. Like, it's all going down the drain. It's all going in the toilet. And this worsens when she makes an unfortunate choice, an unfortunate decision to sleep with one of her co-workers, which lands her in hot HR water that ends up with her being basically suspended in her role. So again, just a storm of shit that Queenie is going through as a result of the breakup with Tom, and also her finding out about the miscarriage, and also, of course, all of this unresolved trauma that she's facing from her childhood. And so that's pretty much a summary of the plot of Queenie and the main themes that I explored in the series. We'll dive into the specific themes in a moment. I just wanted to step in and say that I was actually really looking forward to watching this series. I found out about it earlier this year, and I even earmarked it on my list of movies and TV shows to watch so that I would make sure I checked it out when it came out. Because of course, understandably, I was really excited to see a series about a Black British woman in her 20s living in London trying to figure things out. I was like, oh my goodness, is that my biography? Like, what's going on here? Someone telling the story of my life? And not to mention she's from an immigrant family, and the immigrant story is also explored here. Like, I thought I had hit the jackpot with this one. I thought this was a series that was tailor-made for me and for what I want to see more of in television. And so I was really excited going into this. And unfortunately, I'm sad to say that this series just did not live up to my expectations. The first problem that I thought this series had was a lack of vision and a lack of understanding for its identity and its purpose and even its intended audience. For instance, this series had been touted as a Black Bridget Jones's Diary, which I think is preposterous. Which I think is crazy. Like, why would you even aspire to be that? It's just such an odd comparison to draw from, because who exactly would that kind of series be targeted towards? Surely it would be targeted towards older millennials who enjoyed Bridget Jones's Diary, the white version, from the early 2000s. But then why do you have a protagonist who's in her mid-20s and is therefore a Gen Zer? Surely a better comp then would be something like an Insecure, which is still directed towards millennials, but at the very least was more in the pop culture zeitgeist in the 20-teens, and would therefore have been watched by some older Gen Zers like myself. So already, number one, you have an alarming misunderstanding of the target audience and identity and purpose of the series simply by touting this as a comparator to Bridget Jones's Diary. And that became evident in the script itself, because this series tried to tackle a whole bunch of different societal issues and had a whole bunch of socio-political commentary. Now, this is something that I would expect in a show that is centered on a Black British woman, because we're still at that sort of fledgling phase where we haven't gotten a lot of Black British female representation, so we still need to over-explain everything, unfortunately. Like, we can't just have some things be a given. We still need to explain parts of the Black British female experience, especially for wider audiences. More on that in a second. I'm not surprised that we were still talking about white people touching Black people's hair. I'm not surprised that we got name drops from famous Black British female activists and historic figures like Mary Seacole and the like. I'm not surprised that this series delved into that narrative. What I was surprised and disappointed by was the angle that the series took when it came to the social commentary, because it didn't feel like the series was trying to have a conversation with me about our mutual struggles of being Black, female and British in this country. Instead, it felt like it was trying to teach others. It felt like it was primarily speaking to a white audience and pretty much pandering to them a lot more than I expected it to. Whereas if you take a look at previous series that have centered on Black women, like your Insecures or even your Chewing Gums, or even your I May Destroy You, where is Michaela Cole? But if you take a look at those shows, it felt like we were having a conversation with those creators. Like, we were a part of that conversation. They were talking to us as the primary target audience. Whereas this series decided to take the baffling approach of making me the outsider, while it turned its attention towards other audience members in order to lecture them. And like, that wasn't a very pleasant experience for me, because a lot of the material that was being covered was super basic, super repetitive to what we have seen elsewhere across the entertainment landscape. Nothing new was being said, and it wasn't being said in an innovative way. And so in the end, I definitely found myself nodding along and agreeing with what was being said, agreeing with the points made about the Black British, especially female experience here in the UK. But I wasn't engaged in the conversation. I didn't feel like something something new and exciting and innovative was being done here. And on the topic of socio-political commentary, another issue that I had with this script is that it was trying to tackle too much in too little time, and it wasn't able to dedicate the time and energy and attention to these individual matters that they deserved. And that unfortunately is an ever-present theme in Hollywood and British productions alike, as we start to see some, very few, but some productions delve into these really important and fascinating topics. A lot of them tend to blunder them by trying to do too much at once and therefore failing those individual topics, whereas they could just focus on specific things and try to do them justice. Instead, we just get an amalgamation of problems, and problems just kind of being thrown at the wall and seeing what sticks, and in the end the impact of the commentary is lost. For instance, this series in its 8 episodes alone tries to tackle women's reproductive health, mental health, childhood trauma, the immigrant experience, especially from the Windrush generation that came to the UK in the mid-20th century, which Steve McQueen did a whole series about a couple of years back, which I have reviews of on my channel, by the way. But then you also have, relationship drama, also an exploration of sexual health and sexual encounters, casual sex, and sort of aggressiveness or consent. Matters of consent is also explored here. You also have friendships being explored here, with Queenie being predictably a very selfish friend because she has that main character energy, because she's the main character. And so that also becomes a topic of conversation, female friendships and navigating that around relationships. You also have the drama surrounding her professional career, and also the microaggressions that she faces in that setting. And that's just to name like 10 topics. Literally, that's just to name 10 of the many other topics that are explored in this series and are all half-baked as a result. And speaking of Queenie's professional career, that was honestly one of the things that pissed me off the most about the show. That was one of the things that pissed me off the most, because what? So as I said, Queenie works as a social media assistant at this publishing company, but she's not in the place that she wants to be career-wise. She wants to be writing articles and doing actual journalism. She has ideas on, writing pieces about Black women and Black British women and, that kind of commentary and analysis. That's what she wants to bring to the table. And we've seen this kind of storyline before. Maybe that's why they were comparing it to Bridget Jones's Diary, because Bridget Jones was obviously also a journalist and she wanted to write interesting pieces. So maybe that's where the comp is, although it's still a terrible comp. It's still a terrible comp. And it's also a very cliche job. Like, it's a very early 2000s kind of female protagonist job. Like, we all remember those female protagonists in rom-coms that were writers or journalists or worked in a publishing company. Like, we've seen a million of them. But yeah, I guess we could just add Queenie to that pile, even though it's 2024 and barely anyone's reading newspapers anymore. And actually, she would have a bigger impact if she made use of her social media presence than if she's writing a tiny little article in that newspaper anyway. And that's something that takes her a whole 8 episodes to realize. And quite frankly, that's way too long, especially considering she's a Gen Zer. But anyways, that's not even what pissed me off the most. That's not even what pissed me off the most. What pissed me off is that we are supposed to feel bad for her because she's not progressing in her career the way that she wants to. She's not being given the opportunities to write these articles, and we're supposed to believe it's because of racial discrimination, right? Like, that's the undertone that we're going for here. We're supposed to believe that that progression isn't happening because she's a Black woman in a white majority company. And that would have been all well and good if she was actually good at her job, which she isn't. She sucks at her, like, she's bad. She's actually bad at her job, and that's what pisses me off. That's what boggles my mind, because the audacity. Okay, we've all heard the saying, like, you have to work twice as hard as them to get half of what they have. If you've seen Scandal, then you already know that saying. Papa Pope used to say it all the time to Olivia, okay? So we already know what's up. But the thing is, that saying only applies if you're actually talented. That saying only only applies if you're actually good at your job, if you are actually working twice as hard as them. But she isn't, you see. Queenie isn't even working half as hard as them. If anyone deserves a raise, it's Darcy, her white friend from the office. Like, she works twice as hard as Queenie. She does Queenie's job for her, while Queenie is stumbling in there, half drunk, hungover, from another one night stand, trying to figure things out. Sure, but like, she's really unprofessional. She doesn't do her job particularly well. And the pitches that she has, like the pitches that she comes up with to sell her material for an article, are half-baked. Like, they're not even that compelling. She doesn't even have a clear vision of what she wants to say in these articles. So you don't really buy the idea that she has something significant to say, that she has an interesting viewpoint. And if you don't buy it, if I don't buy it as a Black British woman watching this series, then why would I expect her white female manager to buy it? Why would I expect her company to be invested in her progression if she's not even showing the material? I think Queenie's incredibly supportive friendship circle, combined with the fact that she kept getting all of these second chances at work, despite the fact that she was terrible at her job, just led to her looking like an awful person at the end of the day. Like, it was really hard to sympathize with her because it seemed like she was handed all of these, you know, great people and great opportunities on a plate. She was missing out on them simply because of her own selfishness, inadequacy, and unprofessionalism. Just to take a break from bashing this series, I will say there were some elements of the story that I did really enjoy and found really, really compelling. And that was mostly centered on the family storyline, exploring Queenie's family and her extremely complicated relationship with her mother, because that's where a lot of her childhood trauma stems from. It delved into her mother's previous relationship with a very abusive man who used to treat Queenie and her mother absolutely terribly. But unfortunately, her mother was wrapped in this man's orbit, and she ended up leaving Queenie for an undetermined amount of time. I think it was several months that she was in the house all on her own at a very, very young age. And since then, Queenie has struggled to forgive her mother for seemingly choosing her relationship with this awful, terrible man over her. That storyline was super compelling to me. I was fully invested in, you know, diving into the history of Queenie's family, especially in that episode, I think it's episode 6 or 7, where they kind of go through that history in a really quick way. And it's a shame that it was so rushed, but it gives you an insight into the Windrush generation, you know, the generation of Caribbean people who came to the UK post the Second World War, and they were invited to do so. Okay, they were given passports by the British government so they could work here and fill in all of the roles that were available after the war when the country was being rebuilt. But also, fast forwarding into the present, you see how this generational trauma could also translate to Queenie's relationship with men and the kinds of men that she chooses. It's alluded to that she prefers to date white men, perhaps because she wants to distance herself from the black man that her mum dated that was extremely abusive towards her. So all of this stuff that the series delves into is actually really interesting and compelling, and I think that's the strongest part of the script. I just wish that everything else surrounding it was as well written. And speaking of writing, I would say all across the board the writing was pretty weak for this series. Unfortunately, the dialogue was quite cringe at times. We're using a lot of BLM buzzwords that we saw being thrown around in 2020, and it just feels a little played out and performative and not really organic at this point, especially coming from Black British characters. It just felt like they were kind of ticking boxes as opposed to having organic conversations between fellow Black people. Like, that's just not how we talk. And that was my first indicator that I wasn't supposed to be a part of this conversation, because actually this was targeted for another audience. Another issue that this series suffers from is a lack of creative vision. It's just really bland. It's kind of boring. I'm sorry, but it is. It's kind of boring in a world where Michaela Cole exists, okay? In a world where Issa Rae exists, in a world where Shondaland exists, we've seen black women produce magic for the small screen, and this ain't it. Even if we're not looking to big Hollywood names, for instance, just last year we had Rye Lane, which was yet another, you know, small black British production, and that also had a very creative thumbprint all over it. So this, in comparison to a Rye Lane or a Chewing Gum or a Some Girls, you know I love Some Girls, is just so bland. Like, it doesn't have the sauce, it doesn't have the spice, and it's not just to do with the script, although like I said, that's really weak, and also it's supposed to be a comedy, but it's not particularly funny. It's also really weak, like visually, just in terms of the camera work, just in terms of world building. Like, there's just nothing special about this, unfortunately. So now let's get on to the characters and the cast. And first up, of course, we have the titular character, Queenie herself, who is portrayed by Dion Brown. And again, I'm so sorry, it kills me to say this. I hate being the bearer of bad news, especially for a show that is based off of a black British female character. Like, this is just my worst nightmare. But I have to be honest, guys, I have to be honest. I don't think Dion Brown was hitting the mark. I don't think she did what needed to be done. I did not find her to be charismatic. I did not find her to shine on screen. I found her to be quite bland and quite underwhelming. I thought that she was really good at portraying the pathos in the character, especially when they were delving into her family history and her PTSD and childhood trauma. Like, all of that deep and serious stuff she was really good at conveying. But when it came to the more light-hearted and fun stuff, and this series is technically supposed to be a comedy, she just wasn't hitting the mark. Like, the comedy wasn't comedy. It was particularly annoying because the character is written as a sort of big, boisterous, charismatic, loud black female character. Like, she's supposed to be the stereotypical loud black girl who has attitude, who has, you know, incredible style, she has an incredible personality, she's charismatic, she's the center of attention. Like, she's supposed to have that big persona, but in reality, Dion Brown's performance had none of that. And so it was really bizarre and really jarring, where she kept referring to herself as a big, boisterous, loud personality, but we didn't see any evidence of that on screen. But you know who did have an incredible personality? You know who did absolutely shine on screen? Bella, who portrayed Kyazike, who is Queenie's best friend, the African best friend, who is a whole vibe. I want her to be my best friend. I want her to be my friend so badly. She had a whole vibe. She had a huge personality. She shone on screen. She was an instant star, an instant icon. I don't know why. I don't know why this series wasn't centered on her, because best believe, if this show was about her, if this show was about Kyaz, a lot of the problems that this series had would have been fixed, or at least would have been less egregious and more forgivable, because she was a shining star on the show. Really and truly, it should have been about Kyaz to begin with. It should have been about her, because she was the only, literally the only character that I was invested in the entire time. The only one that I actually wanted to see more of. The rest of the cast is pretty good here, although they are hampered by a really weak script, and also at times it feels like they're going through rehearsals. Like, it doesn't feel like the polished final product quite yet. But I would say the standout performances to me were Luella Gideon as Grandma Veronica, and of course we had Granddad Wilfred, portrayed by none other than Joseph Marcel. Oh my goodness, Joseph Marcel from Fresh Prince. Jeffrey himself was in this series. What an incredible get. I didn't even know he was an actual British actor, but it was amazing seeing him on screen again, and he was definitely a highlight. Like, ooh, you could tell that he was just another class of actor, because when he had scenes with Queenie, it was just night and day. I'm sorry, but man, he's such a brilliant actor. It was so wonderful to see him on my screen again. Another standout was Tilly Keeper. I really enjoyed her portrayal of Darcy. I just thought Darcy was such a nice character and deserved better from her friend Queenie. She just seems so nice, and she seemed like the kind of person that I would love to work with. So yeah, Tilly Keeper did a great job portraying her. And again, like, she's yet another character that I would like to see more from. Then another actor that stood out, although for all the wrong reasons, was John Pointing, who portrayed Tom, Queenie's boyfriend. Like I said, they had zero, literally zero, -1 chemistry with each other. Like, it was awful. It was really, really bad. And that's kind of a problem when a lot of the show is centered on Queenie trying to get over the breakdown of her relationship with Tom. And when you don't buy her relationship with Tom to begin with, that just makes for a very painful viewing experience. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Queenie a 6 out of 10. So that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Queenie, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the series if you've watched it. You probably haven't. Down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.